Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons & Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our role-playing games. Back again, I think this is his Zoom room, not mine at this point, as we come in, is Rob. Rob, how are you, my friend?
Hello, I'm all right, thank you. It's very early. Someone said, let's record at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and that person should be shot. Taken out and into the desert and shot.
I seem to remember there was like a bargain about, 10? 9:30? 9?
It got very stupid.
It got stupid, but it's okay. We're here now, and we both made the choice, and it's fine. Rob, what are we talking about today? What is our topic of choice?
So today it's Al-Qadim, the classic second ed D&D setting that I've never played in. I've always wanted to. I always saw it as a box on the shelf, and I always looked in the original player's handbook. When you first opened, not the original, the second ed, when you opened the page, there was sort of a list of all the settings, and Al-Qadim was the one you could never find in the shops, along with Hollow Earth and Birthright. People remember them. And I always looked at it and I thought, well, actually, I want to talk about it. I want to read it and talk about it. I'm a big fan of certain films that we'll talk about in a little bit. And I just thought it'd be a fun one to explore. And it's something that's been seemingly untouched in 5e, I think. It doesn't seem to have any sort of influence on 5e at all. I may be wrong on that. I'm sure YouTube commenters will let us know if we've got that wrong. But it seems to have been almost not forgotten, because Wizards of the Coast you can still buy the PDFs online, but it seems to have been one almost like Dark Sun that has been a bit sort of, you still exist, but you're over there. But as we've seen literally yesterday, 2 days ago, Dragonlance and Spelljammer being brought back. Maybe Al-Qadim, I doubt it though, because I think they won't want to sort of touch on because there are issues with Al-Qadim.
So Al-Qadim is basically an Arabian Nights themed campaign setting, and it's set in the land of Zakhara, this idea of land of fate and stuff like that. And it's sort of get these inspirations from sort of the real sort of Middle East, what used to be Persia, Turkey, all the way to sort of the big mountains of Spain, and then the mythological sort of like Middle East and all those sort of myths and legends and stuff like that as well. And of course, Arabian Nights from Hollywood films as well. And so I will say that the original campaign, I think, was written by white people. So I wonder, it is interesting because people have actually been asking for an Al-Qadim update and stuff like that. The people are keen on it because it's a very interesting setting. But I think the worry is that obviously if it is updated, it needs to be treated with great sensitivity and get some more voices in to reflect the culture that it's talking about as well.
Very much so, because it's almost like the source text is the sort of 50s and 60s films about Arabia and those tropes, rather than, say, going deep into, okay, if we're going to base it on Arabia in the 15th century, let's go and have a look at Arabia in the 15th century. It's more, okay, let's watch Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger and make a film out of that. Exactly. And I will say as well, just as sort of like, Faerun is sort of based on medieval Europe, but without signposting like, this is France, this is blah, blah, blah. Same thing with Al-Qadim as well. It is definitely drawing on all these influences, but it's not saying this is a particular part of it, which I do think is quite, obviously, it saves any trouble, I guess. But I will say that at the top. But as you said, there are some interesting elements of it, which, again, it has that very much like a legacy disclaimer saying things have changed since we've written this book. So going into that with an open mind, I guess, is the main thing, because I certainly did that. And I actually was very interested in actually how it was portrayed, because it was very different to what I expected, actually. Yeah, the society it depicts is actually very progressive. It's very interesting. It's very it literally has soul sidebars about the role of women in the societies, and also mixed races and stuff. In terms of, obviously, we're talking D&D. So while it is also the Arabian Nights, there are also dwarves and elves and orcs and githyanki and all your things. It puts across a land that's seems nicer to live in than the rest of the Forgotten Realms. We should also mention it is actually also in the Forgotten Realms.
Yes, it is. It's down south, east, past sort of the Toril and that sort of thing. And it's if you look at the big map of it, as you were saying before, it's sort of down there, neatly cut off from everything else. It's very hard to it's very hard to get into it, I guess, because obviously I guess it wants to be self-contained as a setting. But I'm sure you could portal your way there, or use magic carpets or anything like that to get over it. So yeah.
And or, have a certain sailor sailing from it to the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah, through the crowded sea. Absolutely, absolutely.
But I found, I don't know about you, Fiona, it's interesting because it's kind of split. To read about it, you need 2 supplements. It's very strange. You have Al-Qadim Arabian Adventures, and this is the mechanical book. It explains the setting kind of quite loosely. Yeah. It brings in a lot of specific rules to the setting, which we'll go through because I think some of them are brilliant. And actually, I think a lot of them are things that now we take for granted in 5e. There's things you go, that's standard, but it was not in second ed. And then there was a box set released. There was actually 2 box sets released, but the box that you needed was called The Land of Fate. Yes. And this was Player's Gazette, here's the land. He's literally down to everyday life, what people have for breakfast, how they wore. And I feel like a lot of that is pulled from maybe reality, and I'm using bunny ears here. Yeah. But obviously the sort of, ideas. And it presented a gazetteer, which actually is a lot of information to read in one go.
A lot of information.
Less than Tolus, but true. It explains the city-states. It explains the different organizations that exist. It explains how the civilizations are run. And then classically, there's the player book, then there's the DM's book, and the DM book goes, and here's the truth behind it all. Yes. Which I thought was quite cool, yeah. Yeah, I really like that. And I really liked in that how it gives you, in the Player's Gazette here, it'll say something like, in this city, in the city of Cuz, the Caliph has gone mad because his favoured daughter has disappeared. Then when you open the DM's book, it will give you 3 reasons why that's happening. You pick it. Yeah, I think that's great. I quite like that. And so that the Adventurer's Guide to Zakhara, the whole sort of region is obviously called Zakhara. It read very much like a Lonely Planet guide, incredibly detailed. And actually, I was actually quite interested in it because it's obviously we'll go into it in a lot more detail, but this idea that there's 2 sort of separate sort of nations coexisting and what a day in the life for each of them is, and right down to obviously, as you sort of mentioned it off podcast, but a coffee ritual, call to prayer, all that something really detailed. And I think I do suspect when they're creating this thing, it was obviously another Jeff Grubb creationist. I like the idea that, well, again, I don't know if this is true, but I like the idea that it's that sort of thing where this is such a different culture than most people would be aware of. So maybe they were like, here is a full-on primer, exactly what you're expected or what is expected. And that's because it's so different to medieval Europe, all that sort of thing. So they're like, we want to make an effort to be like, even though it is a lot to read, I will say that. I'm holding it up. It's 120 pages for a player if you're trying to get into it, compared to the Tolus thing. Yes, it could do with a 30-page, but here's what you really need to know. But I really liked it, though. I have to say, I think it's incredibly well written. I enjoyed 100%. Reading it. It was actually like, even when you're down to, because there were points where you'd be reading the attire and you go, okay, I can actually skip this. I get the idea, skip it. But it's very well written. It's an interesting read. I didn't get bored reading it because there were even points where I thought, I don't need to read this. I didn't feel like I don't want to read this just for the purposes I need to record a podcast tomorrow. So, exactly. I can't read all these, but it's really well done. Like you get a good sense of this place. And I said to you immediately, I was like, I'm going to be running an adventure in a different setting. I was like, God damn it, I should have picked this thing. It draws you in. It's really interesting in terms of how it's presented and what there is in it. It is the Arabian Nights, but should we talk about what makes it a bit D&D-ish? What do you think makes it? Why aren't you playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game set in the Arabian Nights? What do you think makes this? I know I've just sprung this on you, but what do you think makes this a bit more D&D-like than another setting? I think, you could do this for any settings now that I think about it, but this idea that, let's talk about the 2 nations very quickly. So you've got I've listened to so many pronunciation guys to try and get this right, but I'm not going to write it. You get the city dwellers, which is the Al-Hadir, and then you've got the sort of the nomads, the desert dwellers, sort of Al-Bada. And what I love about it is that they coexist. Obviously you have a few raiding parties from the desert dwellers, etc. But each group, each sort of civilization pities the other one. Because they're like, well, they poor things, they don't have houses. Oh, poor things, they're trapped in their cities, And I actually quite like the description and that sort of the sort of beliefs on that, because
that's very true, right? You have friends who like own a boat or anything like that, and you're like, oh, that's not a river. Oh, but now I'm free to roam the riverways and that sort of thing. And I think so that feels very much like, you know, that sort of thing where you encounter other groups of people, say in fantasy settings, and you maybe you don't understand their point of view, but they're not aggressive towards you, or they're not like, well, you must take our ways and stuff, which leads on to there's this big belief that, as with all sort of D&D settings, that there's pantheons of gods, and it doesn't matter what god you believe in. If it's not one of the traditional gods, the Zakharans, they're willing to have that conversation with you, willing to have that tolerance, talk about it, want to actually engage and chat to you about it. So they're happy for you to accept any god, but if you don't worship any god, that is seen as suspicious, which again, that's very different to other things, because obviously, you know, again, there is that sort of coexistence with gods in general, but obviously there is like evil gods in quotation marks and good gods. In Al-Qadim, no god is really considered evil or good. It's just a whole pantheon of different things, very Greek-like in a way, which I quite like.
It almost feels like a setting where the alignment system falls away. Like there are certain powers that are literally, you know, capital E evil and capital G good, but it doesn't feel as important because it feels like a society where there's a lot more intermingling. It's almost like you're comparing, as you say, the medieval Europe approach of the traditional Forgotten Realms of they believe something different to me, thus I should tie them to a stake and set them on fire, compared to, no, you can come to my house and we'll have a meal and you can stay for 3 nights and we'll talk, and then you leave, and that's done. I think what I liked about it, it felt like a society where people weren't jerks. It felt like a society that you wanted to visit and walk around the souks and
it has these sort of principles which are very hidden away, I think, in the Adventurer's Guide, but it comes across in the Fortune and Fates a little bit more. This idea of like honor, family is super important. This idea that you have huge families crammed into small places because that's just the way that society works. But moving out, but you hit on it slightly. This idea of hospitality, that you know you are no matter
coffee.
You've got to do it.
I'm laughing with coffee.
Laughing with coffee. This idea that's fond of salt. It actually talks about in the Fortunes of Fate, talks about a story, I think from 1001 Nights, this idea that someone goes to trying to get Sinbad's treasure or something like that, and they can't physically attack them because they've shared food which has salt in it, and the idea is that salt takes 3 days to pass through the body, so that's, you are under that person's protection and hospitality, so you can't really do anything to harm your host, and similarly they have to look after you till then. And it's just it's unspoken rule that everyone is super lovely to you, and obviously and after 3 days you have to excuse yourself, going, well, I must leave, like sort of like knee slap, off we get to move on to the next thing. So,
it's your role to leave as well. I think I'm going to answer my own question about the D&D.
Please do,
I think what they've done a really good job is presenting the society, which is very much a Western view of the Orient. And I'm using that in the term of how people used to use it, the Orient. And this mystical East where all these, you can almost imagine these people coming back to the Forgotten Realms going, oh, they're such wonderful people. You know, they all let you into their tent.
Plains.
Yeah, you always expect this was. But what they've done is, I think, brought D&D into it very cleverly with the use of magic. There is basically almost not a different magic system, but wizards are very different. You don't have that classic, he's the fireball mage, she's the I don't know what they're all called now, all the spells. What's the one she does on Oxventure all the time? That one.
Eldritch Blast?
Eldritch Blast mage.
I like the fact I knew what it was. I was just going to see if you could. I was like, I'll own it in. Yes, Eldritch Blast. Yes. And
the clerics aren't just, oh, that's a monk. The clerics are very different. There's different strands of clerics.
From these kits. Essentially. Is this idea that it gets to specializations, almost like, I'm sure there was subclasses a little bit before, but this sort of really introduces it into the second edition, this idea that you really specialize stuff. And it talks about this idea of like, if you're starting in an Al-Qadim setting and you're creating a character, that you are these different kinds of warriors. But if you're from outside, if you're bringing an adventure in, then that's a completely different kit and specialization, which I get very interesting.
They're brilliant. brilliant. So I'll do this example.
Please.
I've got a PDF in front of me now. So, for example, you're not just a fighter. You have a fighter. But you're not just a fighter. There's all the different types. So there's askars, which are the sort of almost what we'd see as a town sheriff kind of thing. You'd be the person in your settlement that you sort things out and smash people about and keep the peace. And what they do is with each of them, it gives you, here's some weapon proficiencies you might like. Here's a bit of equipment. Each of them comes with a special bonus, but usually a hindrance as well. Corsair. You're still a fighter. You're still a fighter, level 1 fighter, but you're a Corsair. And that means that you are, on the seas, you're very Sinbad-like. This gives you the benefit of you get 2 weapons to fight with in that classic, 2 scimitar style kind of thing. But, you've got problems because people are like, oh, look, it's a Corsair. I'm not going to talk to them. You've got
swashbucklers,
Yeah, you've got desert riders. You've got holy warriors. You've got Mamluks, the slave warriors. You've got mercenary barbarians. And then, as you say, yes, if you come out, if you're actually from the Sword Coast and you had a shipwreck and you washed up, there's a kit called like Outland Warrior, which just represents you are a fighter from D&D washed up. And that's fine. You get a few proficiencies. I mean, it literally just says make a fighter from D&D. But I think these kits really add flavour because wizards become not just wizards. You've got sorcerers, which I know nowadays isn't a bigger change, but that was a big change in second ed.
Yeah.
You've got elemental mages who, if you think about it, imagine being a water elemental in a desert setting.
That'd be
would become
special.
The focus of a community, because you're the one who's able to draw the water from the well. You wouldn't have to dig those wells. You could draw it out. But I think more importantly, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, are the sheikhs. Who are basically the genie mages. These are the mages that know how to summon genies, have genie lore, because we can't talk about this setting without talking about genies.
I guess. They are here.
They are there, and they are integral to actually the world, because again, to bring the D&D-ness to it, you have the holy city, which I can't remember its name off the top of my head, and this is Mecca mixed with Istanbul. It's your classic mix of Jerusalem. It's got a golden mosque in it and everything, and it is entirely undefended. Completely open, no walls, has a city guard obviously, and it says this specifically, is that it looks open because it's protected by genies, loads and loads of genies. And there's a specific example of when a desert raider got all his lads together and rode onto the city, and they were met by a single mage who was just like, no, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. And they rode him down, and then 20 genies appear and then begin competing with each other to see who can destroy the most of these desert raiders.
In the most ridiculous, grotesque way. You're like, wow.
Don't you can either take as awful, like they're turning people inside out and stuff, or you almost, if you want to, and it's your type of group, you can almost picture the Robin Williams genie, turning into a giant anvil and landing on, 1,000 men at a time kind of thing. So the kits add so much flavour immediately to this setting, and how the magic is done, I think, is very. You can pick up Jafar from Aladdin, you can pick up the baddie from the Seven Voyages of Sinbad, and drop them in and make them a character without manipulating anything. You literally have these things. And I think these kits are really interesting. I don't know if there is a 5e equivalent. You can tell me. You're the 5e guru.
The 5e, oh no, that's even worse. No, I think, to the specialization, obviously with 5e you have the subclasses and backgrounds. And I think this is what the kit was trying to do. But there's nothing, even then, I'd say it's not as flavorsome like this, the fact you have almost over 10 different types of wizard kit class and all that sort of thing. And I think it's interesting to have you are not from these lands. Here's a specific kit about what happens when you're here. I think that's really interesting. That no matter where you are, your backstory fits into this place. And I think that's really interesting as a result. And you got obviously with rogues and priests and all that sort of thing. You got the outlands on that as well. So it's I think it's very interesting because again, it's something I had not really considered. And I love the idea that we would have specialized. So if we take the fighters, for example, like you said, this whole place Zakhara is obviously, it is mostly desert, but there's salt plains, there's rocky cliffs and everything like that. But it's surrounded by huge 3 different seas with islands. So of course you're going to have the corsair, the sort of the seafaring adventurer versus, you know, a desert rider and all that sort of thing, because the land is so very different, so much different than a medieval fantasy. Let's face it, it doesn't have that much water because it's mostly landlocked or big lakes and stuff like that, and it's mostly green, probably difficult terrain. Yeah, so it's just very, very different.
And it really goes into detail about the terrain. What this originally shipped with, which you unfortunately can't get now unless you want to pay a lot of money on eBay, is you got a number of maps in the box because second at D&D, and it gave you a plastic laminate hex sheet which you placed over the map, and it would change scale depending which map you're using. But it goes into real detail about traveling and exploring the lands, because it's something to think about, because you do, in D&D, you do overland travel, and it's kind of a bit like, okay, we're going to travel along the road, then we're going to the forest, inevitably bandits and wolves, and then we're fine. Here, though, you might not run into anyone for days, and you don't want to be wearing heavy plate when you're crossing a desert.
No.
You know, you need to think about this. You need to think about water. I'm going to go on a little tangent here.
Go for it.
Then we're going to go back to the D&D-ness, because I've already mentioned 2, but I think it's really interesting to talk about how to get this into your head. And I've put together a film list that I think would be good to watch, and I've added some to it. So I think if you really want to get into Al-Qadim, you want to be watching the 2 Thief of Baghdad films from 1940 and 1940. Trigger warning, so racist.
Yes.
But there you go, they're there. Then you've got the classic Sinbad trilogy. You've got the Harryhausen, Ray Harryhausen, and these are the most, this is an Al-Qadim, these are 3 Al-Qadim films, because you have, I mean, there's literally a monster, which is an island giant, which is the Cyclops from the 7th Voyage of Sinbad. Like, it's literally, they went, let's do these. And the first supplement for Al-Qadim is a Sinbad mini-campaign, effectively. So you've got 7th Voyage of Sinbad, Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger, and the Golden Voyage of Sinbad. They're not very good, but I love them. They're great. If you want to suffer, you can watch the 2010 Prince of Persia film, which Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, no.
Very boring. Very dull.
It's a shame, because that's such a good video game. The original video game is amazing, but
But that's one to watch. And then I've got a few off-kilter ones, which I think are important. Watch Kingdom of Heaven. It's not very good.
No.
But if you want to see what it would be like to take a D&D adventurer, fighter, and land them in the desert and see what you would suffer through, Kingdom of Heaven is the one. Is
that the Orlando Bloom one?
Yes. Yeah, Orlando Bloom in the Crusades.
I went to see that in the cinema. I thought it was
there you go. Yeah, it's not. They had to CGI people's eyes back in. That's wow. In the sandstorm, everyone's closing their eyes, so they had to CGI their eyes back in. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to have to check that out now. Wow.
Lawrence of Arabia. Yes, it's 200 years too late. Yes, it's a white savior story. But if you want to get a sense of the desert and the lives of the Bedouin, you're not going to find a better film other than, actually a film from those people. And the last 2 examples, because I always have to talk about this because it's my favorite franchise, Dune.
Yes.
And I think Dune is essential for Al-Qadim because Arrakis is Al-Qadim in 1,000 years. It is a society. We've already talked about, you've got the desert people, you've got the town people, and they pity each other. That's Dune. That's the Fremen. And that's the people in the cities. To some people, the Fremen are wild and uncouth, and their bread tastes like dirt. But to the Fremen, they're free, and they can do what they want to do. And the idea of religion, as you've already mentioned, and the idea of prophecy and fate. Fate is huge in Al-Qadim. There is, in fact, a mechanic brought into it where you call upon the Eye of Fate, which I don't know if there's an equivalent now. Love it. You roll a d20. I think you're looking for a 20. And basically, it's kind of a god goes, but if you roll a 1, then you've got the evil eye on you kind of thing. And there's a great belief, it's called the Land of Fate, because there is a great belief in destiny and fate in Al-Qadim, which I think Dune, obviously, that's the through line. And I think that is really important to get over, that there's a different mindset in this land. And if you're going to role play in this land, if a bad thing happens, you almost have to have that kind of, well, it was always destined to happen. As opposed to, it's a difficult one because I think how we role play has changed massively.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And I've said this in Discord to you, how I now feel like an old man looking at role playing. When I watch people, I'm like, oh, okay. And D&D has gone from, in my eyes, there was a period where it was very high fantasy, almost Errol Flynn-like, people slapping their legs and laughing and stuff, to closer to a Game of Thrones, muddy crap, horrible world. Now I think it's there's a lot more levity than that. But there's still this sense of, there's a little bit of grime, I think, to the Forgotten Realms kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas Al-Qadim feels a bit more wondrous. I think it still has that exoticness, that wondrousness. And I think they've brought in mechanics to this, which could be imported into 5e, such as fate, calling upon the gods. I don't know if, again, is there an equivalent to that? I don't know.
Obviously, you can, call on there's certain spells you can do it, but they're very high level. And it's just to do this for context as well. So this idea of fate. So there's a big history about how Zakhara came in to existence. This idea, it was lots of warring nations, lots of clans that going against each other, and there's a woman who's sort of spewing sort of wisdom throughout the whole of basically laws. And this person was sort of given the name of Fate, and the lawgiver, this other maiden, sort of wrote them down on scrolls, which she then hid in a cave, which it does sound like, if you've seen Book of Mormon or know of anything like that, similar, but not quite, I will say that. But she hides these scrolls in the cave, and then years and years later, a young boy finds them and starts talking about the wisdom that he's found, and he becomes the first great caliph, this ruler that all the other clans unite underneath. And it's and then from this person, a whole line, again, very bloodline goes down, and everyone respects that, and the sort of power goes down from him. So this idea that you have those three sort of big figures, you have Fate, you have the lawgiver, and you have the great caliph as well, which those are the important things. If you're not entirely sure what the sort of structure is, it's that sort of history as well. So I think that's very important. But it's so true about the fate stuff, this idea that because it's such a part of belief that everything is about fate, and like you said, fate is not smiled upon you. So there is a story about the current great caliph in the capital city, the City of Delights. He does not currently have an heir, and again, in the Fate and Fortunes, I think it talks about reasons why that could be the case, that fate has not smiled upon him for a long time, and he's trying everything to get better, or it has not smiled at him just yet, and he's just around the corner from having a male heir and all that sort of thing. So it's interesting how there's this, again, completely different to how we sort of do medieval role-playing games, I guess, or that sort of history, that there's such a great deference saying this is the thing, this is the reason why, and it's almost out of your control. And it's sort of, again, freeing in that. I don't know about yourself, but I get so anxious. I'm like, but I need to control everything, and it must be work. In my real life, not role-playing games, I've got over that, I think. But then you're you just go, oh, it is not smiled upon you to stay. And you're like, rubbish, but okay. And you just accept it. And I think, that's true. We don't rely that mechanic, the roll of the die, it's not as important, I guess, because it's not like, oh, if only I'd roll it better or something like that. It's just it was always destined to be that role. And it's just a different mindset.
Yeah, and I think that is really important to keep in mind the whole way through. You don't want to fall into the trope of doing a terrible impression of an Arabian merchant and stuff, because I think that'd be quite easy to do. You don't want to fall into that. And I think that is a trap you can fall into, just as you can if you play anything set in a samurai society, a Far East society. You don't 100%. Want to fall into that. And I think that's important. To go back to what you were saying about how the law developed, it's interesting. It is a woman who wrote these laws, because the gender politics of this place is very interesting. It is more open, it feels like, in terms of opportunities and sort of experiences for women in the setting. There is the traditional view. There's the classic Arabian Nights. There is a sultan and his 12 wives kind of thing. Interestingly, there's also the reverse, where it talks about women who have multiple husbands. And that's an accepted thing in certain families and stuff. There are certain places that don't like it. And I think that's what's good about it. I'll go back to women in a second. That sounded weird. But how it's presented is very interesting, because it never actually says, it's very rarely it says, this is all of the setting. It's often, in these city-states, this is considered. In these city-states, this is considered. And then the desert people have their own lives. So there's a lot of texture to it, as opposed to just, this is Arabia and everyone's like this. Yeah,
it's not a tarred with a huge brush saying this is what marriage is. This is it. And I agree. It's interesting because it's say this is traditionally what it's been. But if you see a female merchant that has 5 husbands in different ports who control that part of the empire, that part of their business, that's also acceptable. And it's like, it just says it in such a way. Again, I think it comes down to that writing. It's just like, this is not an unusual thing, just letting you know. I'm like, that's actually really cool, because it's not like, what, a woman?
Yes, she is noted for it.
Who's got her own business and also has more than one husband. And what? The talk of like, obviously, sort of marriage and sort of divorce as well. Again, it's maybe some traditional in certain places, like, usually it is a woman that's arranged to the first cousin, etc., and the split between them, all that sort of thing. But then, it's divorce said, well, there's no harm in it as long as they agree, like, oh, we're both being divorced or whatever. But then there's rules, she says in quotation marks, but like, it's not like a horrible, like, oh, there's stories about people who couldn't be together, but then do eventually get together in some way. And it's just, like you said, it does feel more open and not as judgmental. I guess it comes from that whole thing about not judging what gods you believe in, as long as you believe in a god. And I think that's the thing, is that as long as you are a part of society or, are part of this structure, it doesn't matter if you're in a traditional role or if you're in an untraditional role. It doesn't matter as long as you're a part of the society.
Yeah, and I think a large part of that as well is brought across mechanically by classes not being particularly gender locked. There isn't like, with these kits, there are a couple, and they say they are the exception. So, for example, one of the kits for clerics is to be a wise woman. Now, obviously, that is gender locked to a female presented character.
The Hakim,
The Hakim, but they are the exception, and it makes a point of saying this is the exception. Same with, there are various organizations throughout the lands. There are particularly groups of what we would call assassins. And actually, Jeff writes about this, and he says the West has almost a wrong, but a twisted concept of, when we say assassins, we think of one thing. We think these are groups that go out and kill, where actually they were very different. These were organizations. It comes from the Arabic hashashin, and it's sort of groups more that they did do that, but they were also information gatherers. They were also political activists. They would also be, they would go into areas to provide help, almost like go in and say, with their agenda in mind. I'm not saying, but they would go, like these groups, religious groups that give out food and water, but you got to come for a meeting kind of thing. They would do that kind of thing. And these groups exist throughout the realm. I can't say forgotten realms, maybe they do. And again, they're not gender locked. There are a couple that are, and again, they are pointed out as this is unusual, but there literally is not only precedent, but encouragement to play as a woman assassin, going into a different society and doing assassin things, without it being like a woman assassin, and she has to.
Didn't expect that.
Yes, and she has to probably seduce her enemies to death. In the classic, that's how women can kill.
Femme fatale.
Exactly. No, they would just, and as you've already mentioned, there are merchant princes and merchant princesses. I don't like that. Sounds horrible.
No, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Merchant sultans and merchant sultana. Didn't know that sultana was the feminization of sultan, because you're like, a little raisin. And it's not unusual. And that's cool. That's really cool, because that in its texture means if your character from the Forgotten Realms warps across, you don't have to be like gaze upon me, I'm a female warrior of level 15. Everyone will be like, cool. Do I buy something?
Done.
It's all done. So you don't have to have that moment of, this is against everything we believe. It's just like, cool.
And one of the best examples, I think, they talk about the city of intrigue, so Hayal, and they have a female sultan in charge there because her husband has died, but she's in charge, and it's almost almost 3 pages of history. So again, what it's great in this adventurer's guide, it sort of breaks down very Lonely Planet, I would say. So you've got obviously a quick description, who the ruler is, a bit about the court, things you would know as an adventurer, what the city is, etc. And it talks about her family. It feels very much, and I appreciate, again, very Western concept here, very much like Keeping Up the Kardashians, in the sense of, here is the leader, here are all her children who are all different in certain ways, and it's like, but why is the husband missing, and all that sort of thing. And it's, again, in the book, it's like, it could be any number of reasons why this is the case, but it's quite nice. It's a nice mixture of, who's going to take over from this queen, essentially. And the answer is hopefully none of them, because they're all horrible. But it's, and that's
an adventure hook right there. One of them approaches you and says, could you look into my brother? And then the brother says, well, my sister is being very, and
it's very secretive, all that sort of thing.
And that's a whole adventure. And I really, really like that every fact and bunny earring has 3 explanations in the DM's guide, because as a DM, I was reading that and I was like, that would be a cool adventure. That would be a cool adventure. That would also be a cool adventure. All of these will be cool adventures. There's a lot of texture to this setting. It's very well done. Down to proficiencies. I really like that there are proficiencies that have been introduced, which are things like grooming. How well you present yourself is massive.
Social station is quite key.
Social station, we haven't talked about that. That is massive. Bureaucracy, bait, all these things that actually make an adventurer more than a dungeon slaughterer. You're not just a fighter. You're a corsair, who has proficiencies in debate and grooming.
Yeah, it's amazing hair on the high seas, the salt.
It's also an amazing debater and can chat people's ears off and stuff, and that immediately makes it more interesting than a fighter.
Yes, and I was going to quickly mention, because it talks about haggling a little bit as well. And one of the very few, I will say, review videos of Al-Qadim did say, well, when they were playing through an Al-Qadim setting, because obviously haggling is such a big part of society, it's sort of a back and forth, that sort of debate stuff, it can increase shopping episodes a lot. And if you're not interested in that, that's totally fine. But I did think that was quite interesting, because obviously shopping episodes, that sort of thing, people do love trying to haggle and getting that thing, even in a 5th edition sort of thing. So I quite liked how there is almost a skill for that. And it's this is an important part of society. So you have to be prepared going, I know what you want, all that sort of thing.
And it gives you so much to buy. There is an equipment list in this, which is huge in the player's guide.
It's almost over 7 pages in the Arabian Adventures,
So you really have so much, but also you have magic items introduced, which are very specific, and some of them are so just sort of wonderful. And again, I might be way behind here in terms of what is available. One of my favourites was a razor of truth. Did you see this one?
No, tell us about it.
It is a barber's razor. And when you're shaving someone, you can question them. And if they lie, it nicks them.
Whoa!
So, that is an NPC right there, the barber that has got the razor of truth. So they, you can question, you can chat to the person they're shaving, and then if it nicks,
you're like,
then and that's brilliant. That adds,
because that's so small and every day. And just, again, feels very much like that low level, everyone knows you just lied or something. Everyone knows it. It's just unstated. I love that. Yeah, that's so cool.
Means you can imagine an adventure, as you say, a shopping episode, but a shopping episode with the barbers and the baths and the intrigue kind of thing could be as much fun as exploring the desert and the dungeons. Interestingly, how did you feel about, there doesn't seem to be much talk of dungeons. For a game of Dungeons and Dragons, there are ruins.
Yes, because there's definitely other civilizations that have been lost to the sands of time and all that sort of thing. I actually don't mind, because I will say, one of the things I certainly struggled with the Adventure Guide is that there are so many cities, and this is something definitely for me that happens all the time. As soon as there's more than 3 cities in the book, I lose interest. But I think, again, it does a very good job of here's it structured and all that sort of thing. But I think, because you've got so many choices for cities, and then, like you said, you've got big travel stuff between them, usually on camelback, all that sort of thing, and you've got the desert with the sort of the desert dwellers and that sort of thing. I don't think you need obviously it talks about monsters as well as a little supplement about that. If you go into the mountains, you have the evil yak man, which is terrifying. I love that idea.
They're ogre-sized yak people, aren't they?
Ridiculously big. The picture, if I hold up the picture of it, how terrifying is that?
They are in 5e. I investigated this. They appear in the Storm God's Thunder.
She says, looking at it, Storm King's Thunder.
Yes, they appear in that. So they do have a 5e equivalent.
Yes, they do.
They're, I think, the only monster, and genies, I think, that appear in 5e from this. And they are mentioned as coming from this place. So I think that's the one through line kind of thing. But you're right, I'm just looking at the chapter. There are literally chapters of cities. There's cities of the heart, cities of the north, cities of the pearl, cities of the pantheon, and cities of the ancients.
Yeah, so you've got a whole ton of cities that easily enough that you could put your own city in, and whatever means. So, but I quite like, again, talks about certain, say, the Al-Badir, and again, the different tribes about that. And again, when it sort of breaks down the sort of like, okay, this tribe has, also this clan, has this ruler, and they've been told they shouldn't go into the city because only their death will be met there, and all that sort of thing, because it's received visions. And that I think is quite cool. This idea that why people wouldn't go into these cities, or they don't trust them. There's definitely, apologies, I can't remember which tribe it is, that they got split. Half of them did go into the city and half of them don't. And it's this sort of tension between them now as a result. For me, Al-Qadim is about this. It's about the society aspect of it. So you've got these, you've got the honor, you've got the family, you've got the hospitality stuff. So it's about that. And I guess politics onto a certain level, but then it's so sort of structured in a way that...
I think local politics would be quite interesting, that because as a group of adventurers, you probably could affect which of the new sultan will take over, or which of the Grand Caliph of this city, of this region.
Yes.
You have room to play. I think it's a setting where you've got room to play.
Ignore the pun, but it's sort of a big sandbox in a way. Right?
Yeah, because if you go to Waterdeep and depose the council, that's pretty big.
It's huge, yeah.
Whereas here, yes, you've got the Grand Caliph and you are not...
There's no way,
But you can go to Cadarasto, the city most sinister, great name, and mess around there with the town elders, because it gives you enough, tells you a little bit about it, but it's enough that, as you say, a big sandbox, to use a terrible pun,
It is very terrible.
And I think the freeiness of it is really interesting, in that I wonder if a West Marches campaign would suit it very much. That you take one city, you delve into it, you really flesh it out, and then you have a look at the surrounding terrain, work out what tribes live in that terrain, and then almost, you're never going to travel to the holy city, actually. You've heard of it, and maybe that's the end of the campaign. You travel to the next city, but it'd be a very good West Marches style. Let's pick one of these cities, flesh it out, and we hang around here, and we become known here, and we're invited to all the coffee parties here.
Yes.
And then we can move on, kind of thing. I'm in fact now just looking at some of these things, and what's really fun with each of them is you get a little rumour and lore. So this is about Cadarasto, which city most sinister, great name. Legends persist that the ancient passages and catacombs of the city's past have survived. Followers of the old cult gods are said to have used these places in the secret worship of their savage idols. Such adultery does not officially exist in Cadarasto, so the Khedive does not go looking for it. Great. There you go. There's your dungeon. I mentioned there's no dungeons, but yes, there are literally right there. A whole campaign of you going down into the deep and finding these ancient gods. And then you've got, again, that campaign, my favourite setting of the city, something underneath the city, and a little bit of stuff around it.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting as well, like I know we kind of mentioned it a little bit at the topic, but not all of it is, obviously you have this huge desert, this sort of haunted lands throughout, and then you have big water stuff as well, but also it does talk about salt plains and mountains and stuff like that. So actually it's a really rich, varied place.
Jungles.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things where, again, maybe a Western side of it, it is the big sandy place. It's like, well, actually there's so much around it as well. Yeah. It's just one part of it. So I guess, you could easily just, like you said, just stick to a city for the majority of it and never go out of it, depending on how you play it. Or you're always in sort of the desert area with the different tribes and stuff, and just making your way up to the City of Delights for whatever reason, but just taking your time, or even just beyond the crowded sea at the bottom. And there's all these different islands there that obviously, hence why it's called the crowded sea. And there's some of them are mapped, most of them are not. So again, perfect. Like, cool, we're just in the setting, we're just going to look at islands for the rest of this. So lots of it, lots of the versatility.
There's a very useful little key on the back as well. I'm holding it up now, which shows you all the different types of dunes and stuff, which is very useful if you are reading the book Dune as well. And it tells you the difference. But it is very important not to fall into it has to be about Bedouins, it has to be about dust and sand. Yeah, the crowded seas would be a brilliant, because then you can just invent your own islands. These islands aren't mapped. So that's Fionaville. And, and there's
finally. It's a one woman going, this is mine.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
Water. Great. And also, if you want to delve deeper, there's a whole line of supplements. Unlike, something like we talked about Blackmore last time I was on here, where there's barely anything produced. There's loads here. And the biggest supplement was called City of Delights, which is a box set going into, I think it's about the main city. I can't remember.
The capital. Yes,
the capital.
Yeah,
but it's also
the
just
Golden Hazoo.
Golden Hazoo, but it is also just a city source box. Absolutely full. So if you really want to play an urban campaign, that's what you want. Which reminds me, there is one city which I really like where the defences are its own slums. It's basically,
cool.
they've not really made a wall, so someone can come in, but then they're just in these back alleys, and the city guard are trained to like pop out and stab you and then run back again, kind of thing. So you could do house-to-house fighting if you really want to do a tactical
that's pretty cool.
If you're
That's
a fourth
really
head
cool.
player. That fourth head.
Yeah, just quickly looking at that City of Delights thing, so just reading what it says the City of Delights is the heart of the enlightened lands, is a religious and political centre of Zakhara, and say its inhabitants the most beautiful city in the entire world. But beneath the beauty lies mystery, for the court of the Grand Caliph is full of intrigue, as is the Grand Bazaar full of adventure waiting to happen. Whoa!
Look at that.
Amazing.
And if you really want to just sample it, I think if you want to just sample Al-Qadim, you don't want to go full hog, you want to run a couple of adventures, I would suggest, and again, obviously all the rules are completely now out of date. You'd have to, you've got to look at it.
Take your time, go through it. Yeah.
I would pick up, and you can get these as PDFs, you need the Arabian Adventures book, the Al-Qadim Arabian Adventures book. It's not the most interesting read, actually, compared to the other two, but it's essential. Gives you stuff about the kits. It gives you the idea of fate and the evil eye and stuff like that. It's a good primer. Watch those films that I've mentioned. Yeah. Also, interestingly, huge amount of Hindi and Tamil films made about the Arabian Nights, a very popular story in East Asia. But don't take that as an authority over Western, because that's still a different part of the world telling stories about a different part of the world. So
yes,
that's important,
absolutely. Yep.
Watch those films, and there's a couple of supplements, one of which is called the Golden Voyages box, ALQ1 Golden Voyages, which I think is like $5 on drive-through for the PDF. And this is a loose campaign of Sinbad, basically.
Yeah, on the crowded sea.
Yeah, you have a boat, it keeps sinking, you keep having to sort things out, and the adventures are a mix of the very Odyssean-like as well, because it's the same story, really. Sometimes you're fighting, sometimes you're negotiating with golden star-crossed lovers, sometimes it's a witch has a problem and you need to solve it. Or there is 101 Adventures, which is a great name, which gives you a little city. So it's a source book. I can't remember the name of the city, but it's pretty cool. But again, there are about 12 adventures, 13 to be exact, 101. And this starts at level 1, goes to level 12. Don't know how that equates nowadays, but that's another fun. Here are some adventures, and they go from the bathhouses to dungeons to everything. So if you really, really listen to this and think, you know what, Rob is right and really handsome, I want to play an Al-Qadim. It's weird that they can tell that for the audio.
I know, it's amazing.
Crazy. Pick up the Arabian Adventures book. Yes. Pick up the about 101 Adventures. And you can get inspiration from that. Maybe you don't play it, but you'll find something, or maybe you'll find something you can transpose across to your traditional setting. Yeah. But I think the lesson of Al-Qadim is presenting the society is so important to making it a more believable and interesting place to be. Yeah.
I completely agree. And just looking at the 101 adventures, like you said, there's bathhouses, deceptive ghouls, raucous merriment with desert riders, the sacred salt bond between host and guest, and a boasting contest. So it is a whole range of stuff, and it's just. That's the thing. I think all of this, is that we should be telling more interesting stories, and it's the same old. I know it's popular, and when you first get into it, I know I'm a big fan of the Norse gods, and I think they're amazing, and I love reading stories about it. But actually, I don't know anything really about the rest of the world. So getting myself introduced in that, but again, like you said, not saying that this is the authority on it, but still being open to these things, it makes yourself a better storyteller, just to go in and be inspired by these things and tell it sensitively as well.
Yeah, I really think you can. I think you have so much fun. I mean, you need to pick up the book 1001 Arabian, Arabian Nights, because that is the text. And the storytelling is really important, because let's face it, when we're RPGing, we're telling stories. That's what it is at the end of the day, it's storytelling. And that is a through line in the Al-Qadim setting of storytelling. There are people who are known for being storytellers. The back of the book literally has 5 just stories. They're just legends.
Yeah, the appendix has a couple of stories in it, which are great, actually. I really enjoyed them.
Basically a little bit of fiction just at the end there, which is lovely. There's a reason Dragonlance was so popular, because it was supported by fiction. And I think it's important to take that lesson and go, okay, so I've got my world. You're writing your own world, or you're not. You're playing in the Feywild. Let's think about the people in it. not just my 5 people who are walking around in full plate mail. Let's think about how everyone is and what are the stories that people tell each other here and how can that be brought into my adventure? That texture adds so much. There are a reason these settings are beloved. And I don't want to sound all, the settings were better in the past. They weren't.
No.
But I think what's interesting with how D&D is presented now, where there isn't a central setting, is there? Is there? I don't know. Is there?
The Sword Coast, Forgotten Realms, because that's been the most on it. That has been sort of the starting one, I guess. But obviously, like we've obviously got Eberron, obviously Spelljammer. We're opening up, you know. So I think hopefully more and more stuff is coming, and I actually do hope that somebody does pick up Al-Qadim and it is treated with, just like we've got the Journey to the Radiant Citadel coming out, which is amazing because obviously we're opening up this world. I'm hoping that we had something similar to this, but maybe some part of Al-Qadim, but maybe a whole load of sort of Eastern Asian adventures, and it's written by people who have that history, who know the culture so well that they are happy to share it and get reflected in the games we're telling.
That would be excellent. I mean, I've just picked up a RPG called Coyote and Crow, which is written by Native Americans about a Native America kind of thing. I would love to see the same for this Al-Qadim. I think it'd be really interesting. I would be interested if they merged Al-Qadim and Dark Sun. That would be quite a fun way of doing it to make this kind of new world. I think the only issue with Al-Qadim, there are lots of issues. I think an issue is if you are not interested in the Arabian Nights, it doesn't offer you a whole lot more than that. And it could feel a bit touristy. It could feel a bit like, let's do one adventure in the Arabian Nights and then go home.
Let's spend a night and then leave after 3 days. Yeah.
And I think, as I say, there are other RPGs that cover Arabian stuff, so why not play them instead of D&D? Yes. I think Al-Qadim is almost too focused that you might. I think having it as part of the Forgotten Realms is better. Because then it makes the Forgotten Realms more interesting rather than just, are we in Western Europe again?
Yes, we are in Western Europe, yeah.
But you also don't want the Pathfinder thing where it's like, this is Asia world, this is Africa world, this is, you don't, because
we shouldn't be splitting up people. No. It should be take and give and like sharing. It's like cultural appreciation, rather than appropriation, obviously. But if we isolate it, then it doesn't do anyone any favors, I guess.
I'd like to take a map and sort of cut out, you can have the Sword Coast. I'd put Tolus on an island in the middle.
Of course, you're going to have Tolus there somewhere.
And then the crowded sea on the other side. You could really amalgamate your own D&D stuff. And I think Al-Qadim would suit that. I do think it being almost ghettoized away makes it suffer as well. Because, unless the DM says your boat sinks and you end up there, you've got to really go there. And if you're like, I'm not interested in that. And I think all of the settings almost suffer from that. Dark Sun was the same. If you are not interested in swarthy, bronze, oiled up men, sorry, I'm just going to stop for a second. You're not going to want to play Dark Sun because it's very specific. But again, if it's a region or an area or a plane that you can easily get to and from, it becomes different. Al-Qadim could do with being integrated into modern D&D in a sympathetic and more practical way, I think. And maybe a bit more fantastical in a way as well. Maybe push the D&D-ness out, because you could play Al-Qadim as a load of humans and ignore the other races. Because, to be honest, it does just kind of say, there are elves, there are dwarves, and they're treated the same as humans. And
that's it. Yeah, it doesn't really go into much detail about, like, there's a couple of orcs and stuff, but there's no animosity, there's no this. And you're like, that's great. We don't want that. But again, all the imagery is of usually genies or human-looking humanoids fighting other things on camels and stuff. It's not like here's a dwarf.
An ogre in the background kind of thing. Exactly. And even then, they're presented as the Arabian Nights monster. They're the Cyclops and the Harryhausen film. It's very. There isn't. So that question I posed earlier was a bit of a trick one, because what does make it D&D? Actually, not a huge amount. There is the magic, but the magic is changed. And there is the alignment system, but the alignment system is almost dropped. So actually, it's very...
It's systemless. It could be. You really could just take a lot of stuff out of it. Like when we talked about Tolus, obviously you could have it as 5th edition or as a Cypher system. You could take the stuff from here, because it doesn't. Yeah, because it talks about like this leader is usually human male fighter at this level. You're like, you don't need that. You could put them on anything like that.
They can be whatever they want, and even then they are, as you say, human male fighters or human male wizards. That's it.
Yeah,
like it's very
not much on that. The other quick thing I just wanted to mention, because I know we've glossed around the problematic areas a little bit. There is is a big chunk of the Adventurer's Guide. I think it's just good to point it out. And it's something I hope doesn't get put into it. It talks about slavery and how this is a very common thing. And the idea is that people who are slaves are the unenlightened, in quotation marks, because they don't believe in certain God, or they don't believe in God. And usually you're either in debt, so you get sold into slavery, so you just pay your debts. But it's always about the person and not the family. So your family don't take that stuff on. So that was interesting.
There's three ways to slavery, aren't there? There is debt, which is, a real world thing where people went into debt, which, you could refer to it as indentured servitude. If you really don't want to use the slave word, you can say, okay, you're in debt to this person, so you got to work for them for 7 months, indentured servitude. There's a punishment where the government, the caliph says, right, you have to go to the quarries then, which happens now in America and stuff. That's a
Making
thing.
roads. Yeah,
exactly. Again, if you don't want to use the slave word, you can still use those ideas. Yeah, the really bad one is the just sort of harvesting barbarian children and stuff and going, well, you're unenlightened, you know what you're doing, let's bring you to the city. And that's the one that you kind of go, that's horrible. That's really grim, because that is the same arguments that will bring these African people across.
We'll teach them.
We'll teach them. So it puts a real stain on the society, which again, maybe people want that texture of it. I don't want to play in that world, though. The classic thing of you presenting that as a thing and a fact is very like, it's the ancient Rome problem.
I will say it doesn't glorify it. It just say this is a part of the society, and that's the thing I want to make it clear about, because obviously, I personally would probably get rid of that whole thing about. I like those sort of not even solutions, but that sort of thing. Going, well, there are servants, because it makes a point of hospitality and all that sort of thing, and like the punishment as well, because again, this idea of system punishment is quite big in it. But it just felt like, because there's been obviously so much discourse about it, and I will say it's slavery for the unenlightened, but that could mean anyone.
So you're in line, right? You're a slave.
Exactly. So it is important, I think, to point it out, because it is kind of like, I think it is out of all of it, like the female politics stuff. Like again, it's like it doesn't really matter, because this traditionally this, traditionally that, but because slavery is such a big part of the society, and it sort of mentions that in a big fact, sort of like this is what it is, without emotive at all. It's just good to just mention it, I think, because otherwise I don't want to gossip around going, oh, it's a great setting, but there's slavery involved.
Slavery, no, absolutely. And it's also a land of autocrats and mad caliphs who can have you executed for no reason. It isn't. It seems more fun, maybe because I'm bored of Western Europe. Maybe it just seems more open and fun because it's something else. But it has problematic elements. I do enjoy the veil thing, just to go quickly back, where there are places where women have to wear the veil, but in those places, men have to wear the veil as well. I just think that's a really fun little thing.
And the transparency of it shows how rich you are, or all the decorative stuff. Again, it's interesting.
But the slavery element, I agree. I think you can still have it in terms of the servitude and the punishment.
Agreed.
But the harvesting of unenlightened barbarian children to bring as slaves is just like, that's it.
Agreed.
So I wouldn't have that element. But overall, I think it's great fun. I think it's really good fun.
So just to say that, we looked at the Al-Qadim Arabian Adventures and then the box set as well. But as you said, there are so many in the line of stuff. And I think it's just a nice to go and learn about these things, or just see it as a thing, whilst, again, as we've always said, bearing in mind that it's not the one authority on it. But I do really hope something comes of it, actually. Like I don't think it will. I think what Wizards will do is like what they've done with Radiant Citadel, that sort of thing. They're going to open it up, saying like, let's create our new worlds.
Right.
Which makes total sense, because then it means they take the narrative, they can tell what they want, etc. But I do hope that we have something akin to this in the future, because I do think, when I read it, I was like, oh, there's actually so much in here that actually could just change the game. It's not like you said, fight, or dungeon delve, etc. You could have it's just a different experience. I think we as role players and maybe as storytellers, we are missing a little bit. So
I really do think it could. If you're not interested in the Arabian Nights and you want to play a Game of Thrones style houses dealing with each other, this book will still have loads for you, because it will have all these politics that you can lift. And okay, it's not a caliph, it's a prince, but the story is the same. Actually, they've run off and become a prophet, kind of thing. And so there really is a lot you can pick up from these for a couple of dollars each. It's worth just investigating.
I think so.
There will be some things that you haven't thought about in there. I think it'd be quite fun if a certain sailor did rock up in Waterdeep one day in his boat as a way to introduce it. That'd be quite fun as a little adventure.
It's like, anyone coming for adventure?
Yeah, exactly. With his big trousers and his turban and weirdly American accent. And
yes, of course.
Perfected. But I do think, there's a lot you can pull from this that I think would benefit basically any campaign, even if you don't use anything. I mean, the list of magic items itself, just use them. They're brilliant. They're great fun.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for introducing me to Al-Qadim, and just thumbs up. Really enjoyed it. It was just something different to read that's not constant Western Europe, I guess.
Yeah. Very well written.
Yeah, actually very well written.
An interesting read as opposed to some Blackmore stuff that you have to sort of grind through.
I always say this about second edition books, but the majority that I've read have gone, the writing is actually really good. It's just a lot of it. Could have done with a little bit of an edit, but apart from that, it's all fine. Yeah. But Rob, is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything you'd like to recommend?
Let me think. So I'm back on the podcasting train. Realm of Fire is back recording and releasing. So if you want hot Warhammer takes, although interestingly enough, I'm now almost coming out of the Warhammer milieu, but you'll have to listen to the podcast to listen. I can't find a microphone. You'll have to listen to the podcast for that. Recommendations? Watch Dune. Watch Dune 2021. It's brilliant.
Great film.
Great film. Other recommendations? No, not really. No. I'm sorry, I'm very boring at the moment. It's still only 10 o'clock in the morning.
Are you saying we shouldn't watch Legend of the Sea Devils at all, Doctor Who?
I didn't mind it. It was short. It should have been longer.
Yes, it should have been much longer.
Yeah, because it's a shame. Jodie really has been dealt a duff hand at points.
It makes me so sad. I'm hoping that this is completely off D&D, D&D by the way, Doctor Who wise, but I'm really hoping she comes back in Big Finish and she has a lot more exploring of the adventures and stuff. I know she's got books and stuff now, but
yes, which does remind me when Daleks and Doctor the 5e releases, are we going to cover that? Can I Bagsy the coverage of that, please?
When is that?
I don't know. I don't know how much further it's got, but I want Bagsy how to. Now, this is the ultimate square into triangle hole of the Doctor Who universe being rammed into D&D rules. So I'm excited.
The announcement came out in February. Mm-hmm. We're expecting that, it's core editions of the second thing that's coming. Does it say when? So I assume it will be years time perhaps, but absolutely. We'll definitely do that because that'll be really interesting, I think. Yeah. And just to finish off, who am I? I'm Fiona. Who am I? What am I? I'm a podcaster. Where? I'm glad you asked. I need to work out this out.
What the hell is this?
Where is What Am I Rolling? It is a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As always, it's going very, very well. We've had loads of interviews recently with designers behind some Freely games. We've had Merkborg, we've had Death in Space. I've recently played Death in Space yesterday at time of recording, which is super fun. We've got other solo RPGs coming out. With Numenera is coming out. It is edited. All these interviews came up first.
Incredible GM. Incredible. The Numenera one, probably the best GM
apparently very good
on the show.
You know what? I'd say very good looking from the sound of the audio.
I've heard that. If you listen to it, you'll be like,
whoa.
When did Brad Pitt become a GM?
Never. And then obviously you've got Idris Bai, that's also coming out by the same GM. We've got loads of other things coming out. And I think that's it in terms of where stuff. We've got offer code at Third Space Gaming, your friendly local game store in Burnley. Just type in the offer code DMBC into checkout. Thank you. We're doing the hands gestures for it as you're typing, and you get 10% off your first order, whether that is a pre-order for D&D books, because they do that. They do have 1,000-Year-Old Vampire as a solo RPG game, the physical copy, which is beautiful and it's a great game, so I would recommend that. There's also got terrain, minis, dice. Everyone has dice. Go get some more dice.
More dice.
More dice, indeed. Well, with all that out of the way, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys on the flip side next time.
On the flip side, stay hydrated, everyone.
Stay hydrated. Bye.
Bye.